Okay, so let's talk about plot twist. And one of the things that I want you to absolutely remember is you can't just throw in a twist out of left field that makes absolutely no sense. You want to make sure that you've peppered the rest of your story with clues that lead to a logical plot twist, so that when you get to it and you look back at it, you're not like, what is that? How does that even make any sense? You can't have Johnny and Janie riding off into the sunset and then all of a sudden Janie turns into a lizard and eats Johnny, unless you have given clues throughout the rest of the story that for some reason that's where it's headed and there's a legitimate reason for Janie turning into a lizard and eating Johnny. You can't have Bobby's head explode unless there's a reason for it. I mean, I really don't want to read a story with anybody's head exploding anyway, but if somebody's head has to explode, I want it to happen for a reason. You need to let your reader know ahead of time where it's going, even if they're not aware that that's where it's going, so that when they get to that twist, when they get to the surprise at the end, they're not completely caught off guard. It's not a total non sequitur, but that they go, oh my goodness, of course that's how it has to end. Now everything else makes sense, all right? So you want to make sure that your twist ending is supported by the rest of the story. And your twist ending is going to come, as it says in slide number, what is it here? Slide number 7. Your twist ending is going to come at the highest point of dramatic tension, the riskiest, most dangerous, most intense part of the story, which is also called what? The climax, right? So if we look at O. Henry's story after 20 years, what is the climax of the story? Now, a lot of students think that it's the moment where the undercover policeman reveals himself to be an undercover policeman and not really his friend. I believe that the climax, however, is the moment when he reads the note in the end, and that it's revealed to him that the first policeman that he was talking to the entire time was his friend, and that his friend was the police officer, and that his friend turned him into an undercover cop. I believe that is the highest point of dramatic tension. I mean, sure, it is definitely a kind of a mini climax when the undercover cop discloses that he's a police officer, but I think that we can't really have any higher dramatic tension than when he goes, oh my goodness, the guy I was talking to all along, that was my friend that I've waited 20 years for. I mean, there are so many emotions wrapped up in that one moment. But this begs the question, if we look at the story arc and if we look at plot structure, then where is the resolution? Where is the falling action in this case? And in this case, I don't really think there is a falling action. And the resolution is actually tied in to the climax. Sometimes the climax is the resolution. And so while it's helpful to use that story arc as a guide for our stories, the same way that Stephen King said in that video that we watched, go where the story takes you. There are no hard and fast rules when it comes to creative writing. That story arc is just sort of a general guide, the overall shape that stories typically take, but that doesn't mean that they're going to every single time. And if the climax is also the resolution, so be it. I would rather have the story end there than having some falling action of Silky Bob being taken off to jail, where he then sits in his jail cell and thinks about his life choices and feels really bad about things. And I mean, why? Why? What is the point? Unless you have a reason for including more of the story, then just end the story. Just because this slide says you have to fill in all these blanks with falling action, falling action, falling action, maybe there isn't any falling action, right? Maybe your story ends at the climax. It might not. It's your story. You decide. But unless it's absolutely necessary to add one more word to that page, then leave it alone. Your story is done. Now, you may think that the old adage, begin with the end in mind, is what we have to do when it comes to twist endings. We have to know what the ending is when we start, otherwise, how on earth are we ever going to get to that ending? But it goes back to, again, that other thing that Stephen King said when he was talking about writing Salem's Lot and how he thought that it was going to end with the vampires winning, right? And the story went a different direction, and the characters halfway through the story called him over and they said, hey, dude, listen up, that's not how it's going to end. We're going to go this way instead, if it's all the same to you, right? So don't feel kind of pinned in by whatever twist ending you come up with. It may change halfway through. You may realize when you get into writing that you're writing a completely different story. And by the time you get to whatever twist you've come up with, the twist is totally different. It may be better. It may be worse. Hopefully it's not worse. Hopefully your characters and your story are solid enough that when you finally get to that ultimate moment of disclosure, it rings true and all the pieces come together in a glorious triumph of writing in a perfect world, right? But don't feel married to whatever ending you come up with. Keep in mind, it's your story, and let the story take you where it will. Don't try and force the story to be something you want it to be. I mean, look, we start off with a certain kind of structure in mind and a certain kind of plot in mind and a direction we want the story to go. And I think that definitely at the beginning of the story, we want to make sure that we're clear on certain elements. We want to know who our characters are at the start. We want to know what the exposition is. What is the inciting incident that leads us to the rising action and the climax, right? But then as the action continues, the story may take on a life of its own. And by the time we get to the climax, it may be a completely different story than we started off writing. But we still have to kind of script it at the beginning. We have to have a jumping off place. Otherwise, we're not really going to know how to deal with our characters. We're not really going to know what to do with them because we don't understand who they are. So we need to have a kind of a solid understanding of the characters to begin with. Otherwise, the story is not going to ring true. Now, with the student example from the slides, we realize that not every single twist ending is going to be this sort of mind-shattering, earth-shaking, revelatory moment the way it was in After 20 Years. In After 20 Years, the weight of 2 decades has got to be crashing down on Silky Bob as he reads that note and realizes who he was talking to the entire time. But with the student example in the slides, we have a middle schooler whose middle school crush turns out to be, at the very end, her sister's boyfriend. So it's clearly not weighted the same. I mean, don't tell a middle schooler that, their middle school crush is not important and not earth-shattering and mind-blowing when they realize that they can't have this person, but it doesn't carry as much weight. It doesn't carry as much significance as After 20 Years twist does. Maybe it's just my perception. Maybe you have a different opinion. But the point is, every twist is different, and it doesn't have to be this huge thing. It could be funny, it could be silly, it could be suspenseful, it could be scary. Make the twist your own and make it true to the rest of the story. But it doesn't have to be of monumental importance, but it does have to be significant to your characters. I kind of want to end where I began because I cannot overemphasize this point, but do not let your twist ending come completely out of left field. Make sure it is supported by your story. Make sure it is true to the rest of your story, not a complete departure from your story. It is going to enrich your story, and your audience, your reader, is really going to get a lot more out of it than if you just do something that makes absolutely no sense, like the end of Lost. I mean, for crying out loud, people gave 7 years of their life to this TV series, and at the end they were like, what? Really? That's what you're giving us? They had set up so many different clues. They had gone in so many different directions, and there were all of these details that people were fascinated by. And by the end of the series, none of it added up. It all was just like, guess what? None of it meant anything. So make sure that your twist ending is true to your story. Make sure that you are true to yourself. Do not try to force anything that doesn't fit, because you're gonna know. You're gonna feel it in your gut. You're gonna go, well, this seemed clever to begin with, but like now I'm not quite so sure. It's not really lining up. And you're gonna have a lot weaker ending with what you thought initially was a strong ending and clever and surprising. People are just gonna shake their heads at the end of it and go, that's just like, what? Really? That's just dumb. We hated that, and now we kind of hate you. No, they're not going to say that, but you catch my drift. Be true to your story, and the ending will ring true as well. And I'm going to leave you with that.